Good, good afternoon, all. Nice to see you all here at a live webinar. That's how we call it. Yeah, around 60 people at home joining us today, and 20 people here. I think that's nice. Talk about archives, record management, document management. I'm not the moderator of the chair, that's Margot Thomas, and I would like to give the microphone to you for a short introduction on today's event.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're not dead, are you?
Good afternoon.
Pleasure being here with you today. The Archives Record Management and Museums thing has partnered with GO Information. And this is why I am chairing this meeting. Eric is a friend of archives, record management, and everything to do with information. And I am happy to say that GO School of Information celebrated 70 years. There are senior citizens. And we look forward to this afternoon. We would like to welcome those in Zoom land. And I am sure we're going to have a very good time because we have panelists, we have two presenters. So let us sit back and take in everything that will be presented here this afternoon. Welcome and enjoy the afternoon. Eric, back to you.
Thank you very much, Margot. And now I forgot to introduce myself, of course, I always forget it. I'm Eric Kokke from the GO School of Information, and together with Migiza, Victoriashoop, also from the Netherlands, we kind of like hosted a series of webinars. Migiza, you're going to talk a little more about what we did over the last 8 months. Yeah. We're going to share a little bit our story about the webinars, and we're going to discuss with two of the main guests, Max and Raymond, and then after that, the presentations. I'm going to get it to you again. Maybe start the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Well, also to you from my side, welcome. I'm very happy to see a lot of people, and some people I met online and see them face to face today. So this is very exciting. I'm happy that you chose for this workshop, of course, because seeing the program of today, I can only imagine that you had a tough choice in selecting the workshop for today. So thank you for being here. I also want to extend my gratitude actually to the organization of Acuril for hosting this event. I can only imagine that after 2 years of not being able to have physical meetings, that they were faced with many challenges, but I was welcomed by, I can only say, the best of hosts here. So I feel really, being part of the family and welcomed into this Acuril event. So thank you for that towards the organization. And of course, special thanks also to GO School of Information, with whom I actually partnered up in doing the webinar series that I will be telling a little bit more about. And I will move away because I realize that I stand in front of the screen and you can probably not see anything. And also with GO School of Information, I partnered up to do the workshop of today. So thank you for that as well. Can I have the clicker, because we changed the structure of the meeting a little bit, so I'm going to switch between a lot of slides, but I will try to guide you through it so you will have no problem understanding what it is that I'm actually going to share today. So I'm going to start with this slide actually, which has to do with the webinar series that we conducted. But before I go into that content, a little bit further back here. The main topic that I would like to talk with you about today is actually what you see on this slide, records management, and how can you basically professionalize that in the best way possible. And I want to specifically hone in on the region of the Dutch Caribbean, so basically all the islands, Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, Sint Maarten, Sint Eustatius, and Saba, and Suriname. And with the webinar series that we actually developed, we try to make what I call a tailor-made approach to the region, because a lot of the questions that have to do with records management are basically the same all over the world. But this region and many other regions in the world have specific viewpoints, specific problems that they deal with. And when we talk about solutions or approaches that you can actually embark upon to professionalize the records management, it's actually important that you take into the account what is the context of the organization, of the region that I'm actually dealing with. So that's why we have a tailor-made approach specifically geared to the region that we call the Dutch Caribbean and Suriname. So through which topics would I actually like to get you through the main theme, professionalizing records management? First of all, I want to look at information. Why is it actually important? Because I do think that every question that you actually embark upon, it's very important to know, okay, so why are we actually dealing with this subject? So that's why I want to actually start there. Why is information important? Followed by the webinar series. So I want to take you along in the story of actually concretizing, okay, we find information important and how did we actually put our money where our mouth is, so to speak. And we did that with the webinar series. Followed upon that, I will go into archiving by design, a concept that I, as a professional, use a lot in my daily work. And I would actually like to sketch the story of why it is actually important to think through the archiving by design perspective and how it can actually help us as professionals become better at getting our records management affairs in order. And then I want to look at something that is what I call a baseline measurement, which actually helps us as professionals to get a better sense of the state of affairs of our records management. And on top of that, it actually also helps us to kind of find the next steps that we could undertake to better professionalize our records management. So this is something that I will go into a little bit further down the road. And my last bullet points, questions, but by no means that this order of bullet points mean that you cannot ask me any questions in between. If you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and then I will try and answer them as best as possible. Okay, any questions now? Yes. Oh, should I? Okay, so I chose the wrong side of the screen. Oh, people at home, I'm sorry. I hope you can see me a little bit better now, but thank you, Eric. So before, no questions, then I will just continue. But before I go into the contents, it's also a good form to introduce myself because I didn't do that. So that you at least have an idea of who will be addressing me this afternoon. So my name is Migiza Victoriashoop. I work as a project manager in digital information, and I do that at an archival institution in the Netherlands. And what does that basically entail? I help the municipalities. This is the type of government that I deal with predominantly to get their records management affairs in order. And I do that because, of course, there is laws and regulations that they have to adhere to, so they need to be compliant, and that's why we need the help from the archival institutions. But another part of that is that when you have your records management affairs in order, you can also render better services to the citizens that you serve, because that is basically what we do as governments. We render services towards our citizens, towards the companies that are located in our municipalities. And to society as a whole, of course, because it's public information that we are dealing with. Well, that sounds all very noble. You know, who doesn't like to have it written on their CV that they actually contribute to a better, more democratic society as a whole? But I have to admit that from my perspective as a professional working at an archival institution, I also have some self-interest here, because if I help these municipalities to have their record management affairs in order, it helps me in the long run. Why? Because I know that some of those records will have to be transferred to the archival institution down the line, whether it is in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, whatever the term is that is being used in your respective country. And ideally, I would like that transfer of those archives to run as smoothly as possible. I would ideally like to see that they have no rework that they have to do because they didn't metadate, for example. I would like to see that they did their conversions on time. So I hope this gives you a little bit of a sense why it is that I want these municipalities to have their affairs in order. It's very important for me to do my job, and in the end also to help the citizens, the society as a whole, to better be able to access the information in the long run. Apart from that, I also do some extracurricular work, as we call it. I am an editor for a trade magazine in the Netherlands, and I also write some articles that then are also published in several trade magazines in the Netherlands. And I also am part of a lot of work groups in the Netherlands. And I say a lot because it is, but if you could see a little bit of a red thread in what it is that I'm doing, the focus is predominantly on the new, more complex information object that we as archival professionals have to deal with. So, for example, algorithms are used a lot by municipalities, federal governments, and so on. But what is our perspective as archival professionals on that? How do we want to archive it? It's a very complex question, but we do need to think about it now, because in a few decades, these information objects that are very complex are going to be transferred to us, and we need to be able to actually archive it in such a way that people can still understand the context and the purpose and the use of these complex information objects within the processes of the municipalities or federal governments. So very important. I think we as archival professionals can really help in maintaining the preservation of these objects. So that's why I actually make an effort to be part of these work groups and bring to the front actually the archival perspective in that. So that's a little bit about me. Now I'm going to go to the slide that you saw in the beginning. This slide that has to do with the webinar links. So I mentioned the word record management and professionalization. But what is interesting about records management is that it is something that has to do with information, of course, but the information that is in the records does not stand on its own, actually. Because record management, per definition, has to do with people using that information in those records for different purposes. Now, when we look at that, it's actually quite interesting to start the thinking process of, okay, so if these people are dealing with the information that we want to preserve for the long run, whatever that horizon is, if it is 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, it doesn't matter. You would like to have those people actually have the right skills and the right level of knowledge to deal with the records. And those records can be simple documents, but they can be algorithms. Different levels of expertise that you need for it, but the main point is that you want professionals with the right set of knowledge and skills. Well, with a group of archives, you see the logos here on the screen: Nationaal, Archief Curacao, Archivo Nacional Aruba, Nationaal, Archiving Suriname, and of course our educational partner, GO Information. We actually gathered around this subject, and we actually saw from the heads of the archives who helped us a tremendous amount in that. We actually saw that there is a lack of knowledge when it comes to actually heeding the digital world that you in this region are actually embarking upon. So we actually set out to kind of try and bridge this gap that we saw, and actually we'll try to adhere to the need that we also saw from the professionals themselves. Okay, so how did we go about it? First of all, we actually formulated a motivation for ourselves. We want to professionalize records management, okay, but we cannot do that in a vacuum or as an isolated island. We actually need to find bridges, if you will, that basically make the connection with the vision that the governments in the areas have for themselves. And what we found is that basically from all the islands, all the governments had this vision that they wanted to make the transition towards an e-government. That's a very nice vision, but you cannot get to an e-government if you do not have professionals working in your departments, in your ministries, in your municipality with the right level of knowledge. So here we saw a gap again that I mentioned, but it adheres to the broader vision that these governments have. So we have a good point in our story to actually bring to these governments. The second point was that we actually formulated an objective for ourselves. So what we actually wanted to do is to create opportunities for professionals who have genuine questions geared towards the situation and the region that they are living in and the situations that they are dealing with. And what we wanted to do is bring them into contact in a very casual way, actually, with experts. This could be experts from their own region or experts from abroad. And when I say abroad, in this context, it actually meant the Netherlands, because, well, okay, GO School for Information is located there. And well, I was part of organizing it as well. And I also have a very extended network in the Netherlands. So this is the pool that we actually try to get our experts from. And we brought them together in online sessions where they could, based on a certain topic or subject, could ask questions and be presented with the newest and up-to-date information regarding that topic. So this is basically what we try to do. And this was our effort to bridge that gap in knowledge that we saw. But secondly, also to try and bring the region more together, because we had people from all over the region coming to the webinars, attending the webinars, I should say, and they asked questions. They were networking. So this is very interesting to see. Are there any questions in between? Because I can just talk all day. So if you want to ask a question, please stop me in my story. Okay, so this is clear, right? This is what we tried to do, and this is how we went about it. Now let's look at what it actually brought us, because I have to mention that we organized this webinar series for the first time. So it was also interesting for us to see, okay, we as the organizational committee, we have a feeling of what is going on in our field, but is this actually true? And you can only test that if you go to the reality and see, okay, so are the subjects that we bring into the forefront, are people actually interested in it, and are people actually attending it? So that was a very good marker and a good metric for us to see if we were on the right track and doing the right things. So we looked at the interest, so this was a benchmark for us. We also looked at the needs, as I mentioned, you know, the archives that were part of the organizational committee, they have a feel of the questions that their professionals are dealing with, but we also wanted to hear from the professionals themselves. What topics would you like to better your level of knowledge for? So we specifically asked that question. Then we had something which might seem a little bit strange when you talk in a series of webinars, but there was a specific need for a framework to help get a sense of what the state of affairs when it comes to records management was like. So were you doing very badly? Were you doing okay? Or were you doing excellent, to put it in layman's terms? And this is a little bit surprising because I think that most of you are familiar with the inspections that archival institutions do at the government, right? So the ministries and the municipalities. I see nodding heads, so I take it that you are familiar with that. And you know, these inspections or audits, they happen periodically. So for example, every year or every 2 years, then there comes an inspection report, and then you know, okay, so I'm doing good or I'm doing bad. And this is an instrument, you could say, to get a sense of, okay, so how are my records management affairs doing? That is true. So why ask for an additional framework? Well, what I see in my practice is that usually governments say, okay, these inspections are very nice, but it's an external auditor coming in for one moment and then saying, okay, you're doing good or you're doing bad. What the need is that they have usually is to have an internal auditor. Because what does an internal auditor actually do? They can actually look at the organization and all the laws and regulations that they have to deal with it, but they can better make sense of the nuances that are going on in the company. And because they have that sense, they can then also better do recommendations, give recommendations, and give them plans to actually better the records management affairs. So I think this is where that need specifically stems from. But if you have any other ideas about it, please let me know, because I would be interested to hear about that. But so actually a framework to be better able to understand the internal affairs that are going on with regards to your records management. Then one need that also came to the forefront was education. Basically, in every webinar that we had, this was something that was mentioned. But not just education, education specifically tailored to the level of knowledge, but also to the circumstances when it comes to, well, certain impediments that you have when your organization is not that digital yet, but you want to make that step. Well, you cannot go from an organization where you don't have, let's say, copying machines that are up to par with the specifics to actually make digital reproductions of physical documents. You can then not say, okay, so we are going to work digitally completely. It's too big of a step. So you need smaller increments actually to go along with the digital transition in that regard. So education needed for that, and GO School of Information actually made a series of courses that are specifically geared to the professionals in this region. So can I back what I just said up with some statistics? I can. So looking at the interest, are we doing something that is actually felt in the field? Do people actually find it interesting what we are doing? I think we can safely say that that is the case, because we had 3 webinars from, let's say, November 2021 until now. So basically every other month we had a webinar, and this is actually the 4th, which is physical. And we had an average attendance of over 100 people, which I have to say was very surprising, because our aim was, let's get about 80 consistently, then we will be very happy. And we exceeded that in every webinar. So this we do surface a need that is going on here. And if you look at the audience, basically that we attracted, it's very interesting to see that we had a lot of people. Oh, let me see if my pointer works. Or you cannot see it on the screen. But we had a lot of people actually coming from the ministries and the departments, which I find quite interesting, and it actually gives me a lot of hope for the future, because when you look at records management and archival management, maybe in a more broader sense, you see that it is not something that is very much top of mind with the departments and the ministries. And that's a big problem, because we deal with public information. It is information that people can use to get a sense of what the government did. And if these departments themselves don't find it interesting, then you have a very tough battle to fight. So I was very pleased to see that they attended the webinars en masse. Of course, a lot of people from archival institutions, also a lot from libraries, which I was a little bit surprised about, but I mean, you could say that both archival professionals and librarians, they basically deal with cataloging information, and that is the core of what we do. So in hindsight, it's not such a weird statistic. And we also had a lot of people, well, a lot relatively, of course, but we had some people coming from private organizations. So even there is apparently some interest in records management. If you look at the geographics, well, I think we reached the region, I can say. We had attendees from Suriname, Curacao, and Aruba as the main hubs, of course. But I mean, they were the part of the organizing committee, so that's actually very logical. But we also have people from Saba, from Sint Eustatius. So I think we pretty much covered the region that is the Dutch Caribbean and Suriname. I also said that when it comes to the topics, we actually asked from input of the professionals attending the webinars, and you can see here, it's a small print screen of the topics that they brought to the forefront. And well, I don't think there is anything very surprising in it, but you see metadata, it came up a lot. Selection, how do you go about it? But also things like standards and terms of reference. So what are basically the requirements that I, as a government, or maybe as an archival institution, put out for example systems, or when I acquire systems, or when it comes to how information should actually be documented. So very interesting to see that it came up as a topic. What I was very much pleased by is AI. and its application. So artificial intelligence. So this is very great because you actually are also looking into the future to the more complex information objects that are coming our way. So this is very, very good, I think. Okay, I think this is the stop. Here, I will stop my story for now and give the floor back to Erik. I will come back later on and talk with you about the importance of information. Then I will go into archiving by design as a concept that I use in my daily practice. If there are no questions, then I will just give Erik the mic for now.
Thank you, Migiza. You can take a breather now. Take a seat, please, on the floor. And Max and Raymond, please as well. I was going to ask you a few questions. And Rita, would you turn on your camera and your microphone? Sure enough. Rita couldn't be here, unfortunately, due to strange circumstances at the air company in Suriname, which is really too bad. Welcome, Rita. It's good to see you here.
Hello, Erik. Good afternoon, everyone at home and in the room.
Yeah, we can hear you pretty well, I think. Yeah. We do a quick Q&A. I'm trying to find a spot where people at home can see me, but it's probably not going to work. So I'm going to be on the side. Migiza, you came up with the idea of doing a webinar series in this area, and I think you contacted Max, Raymond, and Rita, and they were pretty enthusiastic. And then it started off, and you said something about the amount of people attending, and I was really surprised at the first one. I think we had 175 subscriptions. And then I never realized there were so many people working in record management in this area. I was really surprised. And then they only had 120 and 110. And what I really liked as well, that some of the organizations put people together in one room and they are watching as a group, as a team, online, 12, 15 people, especially in Aruba. And it was nice to see. Thank you for your efforts of getting everything together. And all the people gathering in a webinar. It was, I think, really interesting and something we will continue later on. Today, we would like for selected few and a few of you at home. I think I'm going to start with Rita. Rita, can you share with us your experiences from the 3 webinars so far? What did you...
Thank you, Erik, for your question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so this webinar first started with Migiza and I when she interviewed me, I think for a magazine, Archivo, and she asked me what are the challenges we are confronted here in Suriname and the region. And I mentioned to her that here in Suriname and also in the Dutch Caribbean, the actual situation with regards to record management differs from the situation in the Netherlands. And I informed her about, in the Netherlands, they are very advanced with archive by design, with DITO, duurzame toegankelijkheid, overheidsinformatie, and so on. And it should be shared with the colleagues here in the Dutch region. And after the article was published, Migiza reached out to me and asked me if I was interested to organize this webinar. So I reached out to Max and also to our colleague in Aruba, Mr. Hernandeze, and also to you. And so far, it's very surprising, pleasantly surprising that we reached so many people. I think we reached more than 100 colleagues from all over the region. And we noticed that the lack of certain practical skills is really relevant here in the region. And we as archive professionals, as director of National Archives and other participants here from the library, from the ministry, I think we have to join forces to address the situation in the Dutch Caribbean, because we are confronted with the same challenges. And as small islands and as a small country in the region, I think it's necessary to join forces and see how we can, ask funding to do something here in the region with regards to training, workshop, and so on. Because webinar sharing, all right, that's good for now. But I think in the near future, we have to organize training. And I know you represent GO Opleidingen. I see Mr. Theo Verbeij is also here. I think there is a certain role here for GO Opleidingen to start the training and so on, but also for the Dutch government, because part of the Dutch Caribbean is still under Dutch rule. So they have a certain responsibility over there. And, you know, naturally, we also have our own responsibility, but part of that, is also for the Dutch government. So we have to collaborate and look for ways to make sure that the knowledge, the so much needed knowledge about record management, must be, yeah, it must be sustainable here in the region, must be organized here in the region. So that's just in short my contribution.
Thank you. Thank you. Max, anything to add? To the microphone, because it's better for the sound.
Thank you, Eric. I fully agree with Rita. The concept of e-government is very well alive in Curacao, and they very lightly think about this concept as if you introduce a project, but it's an entire program, and it needs a multi aspect approach. Further with that, it's not just information management. If you want to introduce a new policy, you have to introduce a new way of financing that as well, because the way and this is not about information management, but in general, the way the budgeting is organized in Curacao is per year. And if you want to introduce an entire program, you need to rethink how you introduce such an effort, because it's such important. Your information management. I'm sure Migiza will talk about this later. But it's also it's about accountability of your government acts. So it's so important. If you want to introduce this new concept, we need to think big, and so it's an effort. We need cooperation, and so this webinar is not enough. We need more, and we need structural.
Okay, thank you. I'm Raymond Hernandeze from Aruba, director of the National Archives. I'm very pleased to be in Curacao this week, although we have a big week in Aruba too, celebrating the archival week of the week regarding to the International Day of Archives tomorrow. But it is very pleasant after more than 2 years that we can get together again as colleagues, not only from the kingdom, but also from all the Caribbean, so we can interact again personally. But I have to say that the COVID-19, as we have heard these days, has helped us to interconnect via technology. Thanks to the technology, we have the last months being in contact with our colleagues in the kingdom, so we could prepare this webinar. And yeah, we used the technology, and I'm very happy that we could be a part of this, mostly because there is a need in Aruba also to be informed about the changes we are going through thanks to the technology itself, because we are in the age of the digital era. We are in the digital era, and it has its challenges for us too. Like Mark said, the e-government is a challenge for us. Everybody is seeing the e-government as a solution of the form how we work at the government level, but it has its challenges for us as archivists. Our question is not only how we will have that information in about 50 years, because about over 5 years I will be with pension, and I don't have to worry anymore about how we will get to those information. But as archivist and as historian, I'm a historian too, and we have to be how do you say? We have to be aware that the information must be there not over 50 years, but over 5 years. We have it about the digital sustainability of information. That is very important for us, and that's why we are very happy to be part of it. And maybe in the future, a broader Caribbean participation will be possible through this means of the webinar. We have to take into account that most of the professionalization of our records keepers is not to be found in Aruba, but abroad. But we have the problem of resources. We don't have the money or the funding to send people away to the Netherlands or maybe America or in the Caribbean to get their education on this field. But maybe the webinar and the courses that GO are going to give will be a helpful tool for us in Aruba. Thank you.
Thank you. And another question. In the webinars as well, and today as well, we look a bit towards the situation in the Netherlands. I'm active now for, I think, 20 years in this field of record management, information service, information management. A lot of things in the Netherlands went wrong or didn't succeed or with a lot of delay. How are we going to make sure that you, in your development, are not going to make the same mistakes as we did? So profits from our failures, a lot of failures, I think, in government information services over the years. I think it's a shame if you know, in your transition to digital records management, you will make the same mistake. Do you have any ideas how we can prevent that to happen?
Well, if you introduce something new, you will make mistakes. That's not a big issue, because you can learn from your mistakes. And we're not pioneers. We're going to introduce standards from international standards. So I guess that was well thought through. So I'm sure best practices and international standards will have some guarantee that that will be prevented. But as it is a pioneer enterprise, there will be mistakes, but that shouldn't prevent us from doing it. I'm not afraid of some mistakes. You will learn from it.
I think it is a combination of, I call them the field workers, the people that are on the workplace, and also of the policy makers and decision makers. We heard last Monday about the cohesion that is needed for making those changes. And in Aruba, I feel that we are working on it. Not everybody is aware of that yet, because everybody is just thinking about working digitally as a matter of fact for the now, but not for the future. How will it be in the future? And like Mark said, the standards has to be put for everybody, and we have to work in a kind of way of centrally. It's not that we have different silos, and in that way we can we may be we will lose information over the long period, and that's what we have to take into account, and we have to make the people conscious about it.
Thank you. Rita, do you have anything to add? Sorry, Margot?
Of course. On listening to the panelists, it is so important that we, as the heads of our institutions, keep abreast with the changes that are taking place where information is concerned. We mustn't be dinosaurs. We mustn't be ostriches to hide our heads in the sand. And we have to push our workers and help them get qualified, help them get what you, Eric, you are offering through your school, continuous education. And we must be prepared to help finance that.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of promotion for us. Yeah. Thank you very much. Rita, do you have anything to say? Yes.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Eric. So you mentioned in the Netherlands, they already made mistakes and so on. So for us, luckily you already made the mistakes. So we are not going to make the same mistakes anymore. That's one. And the second one is, we also have to be aware and also very careful not to implement what's the tools what are in the Netherlands, because here in the region, the situation is different than the Netherlands. So we have to make sure that what we do here in the region are compatible with our work procedures. It's not the same, although Aruba and the other smaller island, the Dutch Caribbean island, are still considered to be under Dutch rule. I believe that there is a different working procedure. So we have to be sure and make sure here in the Dutch Caribbean that we don't copycat what you do there in the Netherlands. Okay, and Max already mentioned we have to implement and we have to abide the standards, the international procedures. That's all right, but we have to make sure that our working procedures is also compatible with these standards, because it's not the same. The European way and the Dutch Caribbean way, that's a bit different, I believe. So correct me if I'm wrong, Max or Migiza.
I think it's a big difference as well. Raymond, you want to add something?
I want to add something what Rita said. One of our experience is during the webinar is that we had very interesting topics, but for instance, the information structure we have, it's for us a little too far still from our reality. And what impact us was, in this case, the example of our little sister, Hernandeze, who has, their story was very enlightening in the sense that they had the similar problems like we had, but the implementations they did is for us enlightening in the sense that they gave us tools so we can take into account when we are dealing with our own situation. And that's why we said that most of the times we think that our participants in this region are seeking for the practical skills they need in working digital. And maybe that is a kind of changes, maybe that we have to think about it eventually in the following sequel we have.
So, Eric, if I may. Oh, okay. Yeah, so if I may, what we saw is during the webinars is that there is a gap between what the presenters from the Netherlands shared with us during the webinars and the actual practical situation in the Dutch Caribbean. So how to close the gap? So that's a question and a challenge we have to address in the coming years, because we notice that the gap is very big. For instance, archive by design. Here in the Dutch Caribbean, we know about it. We try to implement it, but it's still in how do you say this? It's in a premature stage. So the gap is too big. So thank you.
Yeah, so I would like to add something to what I hear, because it's very interesting that you hear a lot of the appreciation for the examples that were given, but at the same time also a spirit of pioneering and not being afraid to make mistakes in that sense. And what this actually sketches for me is what I would like to call the game of finding the nuances and the game of stretching. What do I mean by that? The nuances has to do with, you see an example that is being done elsewhere and you find it inspiring. But then the challenge becomes, okay, so how can I translate it to my situation? And then the practical skills that you mentioned, Raymond, come into place, because you need to operationalize it. And that is the biggest challenge that a lot of the governments and also archival institutions here have. When you start talking about things like archiving by design, as Rita mentioned, or working under architecture, for example, that is something that is, I would agree, is maybe too far for the development stage that a lot of the departments and archival institutions are at right now. But that doesn't mean that we should not address those topics, because you need that point on the horizon, which in a lot of cases is the vision of, okay, we want an e-government. Okay, the next question is then, okay, so how are we going to do it? Which is a difficult question to answer right now. I would fully agree with that. But that doesn't mean that we cannot place that spot in the far future that we want to work towards. So I think we need to realize that it's always about, okay, the nuances. So how can we operationalize it in a way that works for us? Very important, but we should also look towards the future, because as Raymond mentioned, in 5 years, if that is the horizon, then we need to be thinking about, okay, so what are the developments that we are seeing and what should we be aware of to prepare for that future? Well, for the Netherlands, that future lies a little bit further ahead of us. We have 20 years that we can deal with, 100 years. But that doesn't mean that you yourselves can also not place that spot on the horizon in that same sense. So I would definitely want to encourage you to try and think big and dare to think big, maybe in a sense, because that is where we are going eventually.
Thank you. Well, Netherlands is mentioned quite a bit now. I'm going to say a little remark, because the grass is not greener at the neighbor's place, and especially not in the Netherlands. I think sometimes you look a little bit too optimistic to the Netherlands in the record management digital transition. At the moment, I work for GO, but I also work for the Dutch government, a program called Open of Order. That's there because, well, last couple of years we found out in the Netherlands that there are, last year, how we translate that, information management, records management, archiving is not as what we thought it was. It's terrible, actually, and The result was, maybe you heard about it on the news here as well, toeslagenaffaire. A lot of people were really disadvantaged by the government because the information was not right. And people had to sell the house, got divorced, lost their children, etc. So yeah, terrifying circumstances because of our information management was not right. Of course, we are a little bit further maybe in our development with digital information, but we made sometimes too big steps. I think, when looking back, and everything was still compliant and we had the governance in place. So that's something I would like to add. It's not always better in the Netherlands. On the plus side, we realized it, and there's a huge program, as I said, open a border with 800 billion euros designated to improve our information management. And we're still looking for 350 record managers next 2 years. So if you would like to go to the Netherlands and be working in this field, then plenty of chance. I don't want to take your people away. No, but it's I think we are, of course, we work on digitizing information for a long time, but in the process we made a lot of mistakes. We have the consequences now. But there still is a gap, and he already said something about it. So you will see. Yeah, what was my next question? How can you reach the gap? What would you really, if you? I always say like, I was in exams for junior record managers, and then the last question on the exam is like, if you have no limitations, no money, no time, no capacity, no technology, what would be your record management dream? And you come to your office and you find a note on your desk that today you're the boss. You can do whatever you want. Everything is you can realize it. There's no limits. What is your information or record management archive dream? Well, have some time to think about it, or can I start? With Max. Your dream.
A dream would be you have enough resources and
Resources, no problem.
resources.
No problem. No problem. It's a dream. It's a dream. It's a dream. Yeah.
So I would invite the real professionals and introduce an entire program. And it's not only like Margot rightly said, an educational program, but you need to know what's going on under the hood as well. So there are also other, because if you're talking about the government, it's such a big thing. You need to think about your architecture, etc. And there are building blocks already for introducing such programs. In Curacao, for example, they're talking about the Estland model, not quite knowing that Estland is an EU member and it's also complying with the same building blocks as the Netherlands are complying with. So you need to know the steps to take. And that was my dream. I would invite all the professionals and educate all of the civil servants, because it's such a decentralized way of working. There are no document management centers anymore. Everyone is an information specialist. Everyone receives and everyone sends his information. So everyone needs to know how to deal with it.
Actually, that's part of the Dutch project as well, to make every civil servant document manager, information manager. Raymond, your dream.
I can just, I agree with Max, and I just want to add that I want to see for us as archival institution, we have to make our minds how the archives would be. It would how it will be for us in the future to work in the new digital era. Are we being just archival institutions holding paper documents, or are we going to be a part of the information of the digital era? The information specialist is, in a sense, not the old archivist we know these days. And I think that we have to start with awareness making the government aware that we have to change our mindset. And important is to the education in this. And that's why I want to encourage all the participants now online to follow the GO school courses because they are custom made for us in the Caribbean. I know it's a kind of difficult to get participants, and that's more, I think, of the bureaucratic processes we have here in the Caribbean. But I think that the people are eager to participate, and therefore I'm asking the GO to take that also in account, to be patient with us.
Yeah, we are. I don't know if Denise is still patient because he subscribed to all our courses. Sorry, we're the only one at this moment. Before I go to Rita, Migiza, your dream.
Oh, wow. Well, I will grant myself the luxury that I can maybe go a little bit out of bounds here, but what I noticed from my practice, and it's maybe a little bit different from the experience that you have here, we have personnel. They are not always up to par with their knowledge, but it's like a good foundation. And I would like to see, so how much further can you go with that foundation? So that is my starting point for my dream. And what I would like to see come back actually in the way that records managers and archival managers work is to keep in mind who it is that you are doing the activities that you are doing for. Why am I doing records management? Why am I doing archival management? We're not just doing it because a law says that we have to. We're not just doing it because our boss says that we have to. At least I would hope that people would not think that, because that would be a little bit sad, I think. But why are we doing all of this? We are doing it for those citizens out there. When you want a building permit, you want to have the right routes that you can take so that your building permit can be established, or you can get an answer very fast from the government. Raymond just mentioned the bureaucratic slur that you have to go through. What citizens hate is that. If we as professionals could keep in mind that we are doing it for that citizen, I think we would be a little bit more passionate, a little bit more ambitious about the work that we deliver. And that is what it starts with. Because if you have to add metadata to a file and you think, oh, God, this again. But if you keep in mind that you're doing it for that citizen, then that is a little bit more inspiring than, this again. So I would dream that we could actually become so passionate about the work that we are doing that we actually work like that. And I can actually say that for me, that is my personal ambition, because I have no background in archiving whatsoever. My educational background is not in that, but I developed a passion for the work that I do. And that is the drive that keeps me going every single day that I work. That is the drive that actually brought me to contact Rita and say, hey, I see something in the Suriname that we talked about. What can we do to improve it? And that's when you get innovative ideas, that's when you get passionate ideas. And I think that that is a dream worth fighting for. So.
Thank you. In my contribution at the end of this symposium, I'm going to get enthusiasm to the audience. So, Rita, you had some time to think about your dream. What would you like to share with us? If you unmute, then we can hear it as well.
Thank you, Eric. It's dangerous to say there is a lot of resources available, and you say it to me. So for me, my dream is to build a record management center with a training center, state-of-the-art equipment, and where colleagues, record managers can do their work. And furthermore, because Raymond mentioned it, you don't have to separate record management and archive management because it's one cycle. So state-of-the-art archive, a great repository. And I think the main point here is how can we raise the awareness? And I think training and education is very important. So for me, build a archive school or a record management school here in Suriname or for the entire Caribbean. That would be my dream, to have an archive school here in the region where we can organize workshop, training, and so on, and maybe also a technical infrastructure where we can store our documents, a server, a cloud for the Dutch Caribbean. That would be very, very helpful. So training, build a record management center, archive school or record management school, state-of-the-art equipment, you name it. So I want it all.
Well, the school should be possible. I think that dream is not too far for me at least. I think Migiza was really just when she arrived yesterday in Curacao, so maybe we can work on it. Realize it. Is there someone here in the audience who has a nice record management archiving dream and want to share? Or someone at home? Just unmute yourself or put up your hand and then you will make sure you're appearing on the screen. No more dreams?
Maybe I could share.
Yeah, of course, Margot, I want to ask you anyway.
Recently, we had a visit by Sophie and Richard Edward, the British Royals. And my phone was buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. And somebody from the Prime Minister's office wanted the history of the Prime Minister's residence, you know, because that's where the individuals would have been and so on. Every time our ministry officials need information, that is the time they remember the archives. So my dream would be, it's a dream. My dream would be to operate on the brains of all my ministry officials and get an archival record management chip and put it there. That's my dream, so they will understand the importance of archives and record management.
I think that's a very nice dream. It's recorded, so let's work on that one. That concludes the first part of the symposium. I think maybe it's nice to have a little break. I don't know if there's coffee outside there. Okay, very good. So I'll see you back in, let's say, 10 minutes.
Eric, before you conclude, I just want to remind anybody who is a member of Acuril in good and regular standing, voting has begun from 2:30 and was finished on the 4th. So you 4 o'clock. So you are free to watch more than lectures on that.
Yeah, make sure you come back. So then we see you back at 8:43. And there's coffee on the hallway, etc.
This is Dutch time.
Oh, there's Dutch time. Yeah, Dutch time as well. Okay. 2:43 p.m.
My story actually. Oh, I thought I heard somebody saying something, or is this just from there? It could also be. Okay, so I promised you at the next portion of my story, so I'm going to start, and I also said that I would start here. So why is information important? Because we all do something with information, but why? And why do we think it's important? So I actually went to a study that was conducted in somewhere in the 90s, and the article about it was published in 1995. Conducted on commercial companies. So this is not our field, but what I find interesting is that the researcher actually made a statement that holds very true in our day today. And it also really shows why information can be important in a more broader sense. So what he actually states is that good information offers organization a competitive edge. From a commercial perspective, I think we can all imagine why that would be great. You want to be better than the person or the organization next to you, so that you can get more customers to buy whatever it is that you're selling. And he also found proof for these organizations finding information important because they put their money where their mouth is. They invested in systems of information. So this gives us a clear example of, okay, so why do we find information important? But as I mentioned, a commercial field study was this. So we are in the public sector, we are governments, and we do not really seek a competitive advantage because there's only one government basically. So why do we then find information important? I actually use this quote from our Rijksoverheid. I think the most accurate translation would be our federal government. And they basically state this. This is the Dutch actual quote, and I made an English translation. But what is very interesting in what they state is that we do not seek a competitive advantage, but what we do seek is good public administration. And why do we seek that? Because we want to have a trusted relationship with our citizens. Well, that is actually our form of competitive advantage. We want to be a transparent and trustworthy government. And in order to be that type of government, what is essential is that we grant people, researchers, companies access to governmental information. And we can only do that by having good records and information management. So this ties back into the first slide that I made about professionalizing records management. Why is that important? Because we want to do good public administration. So that is basically the why for why we find information important, I would say. I'm curious, by the way, do any of you have another opinion about it? Or would you like to add something to this, perhaps? Maybe from your experience, I would be very curious. Anyone? Or do you all agree? I cannot imagine that you all agree. That would be... Anyone who would care to say anything about it? Yeah? Sorry, your name, Valerie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's the dream, to have access to all the information, and then once you have that, you can concentrate on other things, like preserving what you have, and that's my job. So I think preserving information, having good information and good access to information is one thing, and there's also another side to it, which is the practical side. What do you do with the objects you have that carry the information?
Thank you for that contribution. So basically what you were saying is this is the starting point, because from there on you can go look at what are you then actually going to do with that information. Yeah. Okay, very good. Anyone else who would like to add something to what was just said? Thank you for the contribution, by the way. Yeah. No other remarks? Okay, so then I will continue. But this places it in perspective, right? Because you cannot do what you just mentioned without this, basically. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so good information. This is why we find it important. I already mentioned this, so I'm going to skip through to this. As I mentioned in the beginning, in my daily practice, I use this a lot. And I want to dive a little bit more deeply into what it actually is. But before I do this, I have a question for you. You can just shout out. When you see these words, what actually comes to mind for you? Just to get a little bit of a feel. I cannot imagine that you have no thoughts about these words. So do you think maybe it has to do with systems?
Customizing.
Customizing, okay, yeah, Max? Less backlog, yes. Anything else? The term maybe by design, have you heard it in relationship with other terms, maybe? I see Raymond nodding his head. Sorry? Privacy? Open by design, privacy by design. Yeah, so what I find very interesting, less backlog and customization. These are the terms that have a lot to do with archiving by design. So I will go into that a little bit more. So what is archiving by design? You have a myriad of definitions that you can use to describe what these terms, what this term actually means. And I've used several over the period, over the years. But I would like to put this definition to the forefront because this is a definition that is actually part of the newly published in a draft version, guideline for archiving by design that is being put out by the National Archive in the Netherlands. And this guideline is actually meant to help people put this concept of archiving by design into practice. So if we look at archiving by design, what its definition basically says is that when you start designing, purchasing, or maybe adjusting a system that you are currently using or are about to purchase, you need to actually find out what the appropriate measures are to take in order to ensure something that we call accessibility to information, but in a sustainable way. So when I say sustainable, what do I mean then? I think the best way to explain this is that when you look at municipalities, for example, when they purchase systems, they know that they can, with reasonable certainty, be assured that the information that is in the system will be there for the coming 4 years. And if they're lucky, they will renew their contract and then they have another 4 years for which they are assured of the existence of that information. So I'm talking about conversion, I'm talking about formats that can still be viewed within the system. This is very good and very practical for the municipal perspective. But when I look at information and I talk about sustainability as an archival specialist, I look with a much broader horizon because I would not like to have that information be accessible for 4 years or 8 years. I would like to have it be accessible for 10, 20, and preferably 100 years. This is the time horizon that I am dealing with. So what we actually try to do with archiving by design is try and find a match between those two very different time horizons that we are dealing with and trying to see, okay, so what are, from the perspective of archiving, measurements that we can take that are much earlier in the process of creating information. And this is a very different way from approaching archiving that we have seen in the past, because then it was, you have a document that was made, it was put into a record or a file, and then after maybe 2-3 years, when that file was no longer necessary for the civil servant working with it, he went down into the basement and there you had an archival specialist that said, here you go, archive it for me. This is basically the practice that was happening. In a digital world, you can no longer do that. You need to do this because the amount of rework that you would have to do if you realize that there are certain measurements that you have to take afterwards is tremendous. And I can give you multiple examples of this, which we have seen in the Netherlands. So if we're talking about examples for how not to do it, it are those examples. And this is why we are predominantly using the concept of archiving by design to ensure that we can assure the accessibility of information in, as early in the process as possible. So, in the beginning, I also mentioned that in my daily work, I actually help municipalities to get their records management affairs in order. And I would like that process to go as smoothly as possible when they have to transfer those records to the archival institution. So basically, this is what the process would look like. So the government or the municipality, they have a document management system in which they did all the things that they have to do to archive it. And then at one point in time, they transfer, basically you're doing a migration of data from one system to the other. And the eDepot, that is my system that everything has to be logged into. Well, this is, of course, the ideal situation. This is what reality looks like. We have a document management system, and what you see is that a lot of municipalities and governments, they have internal rules and requirements that they abide by. So, for example, they have rules about metadata. We can all imagine why that is very useful, because it helps you to find information faster. okay, they usually have a protocol to deal with things like, okay, so which persons are authorized to have access to certain information. Not everything should be accessible for everyone, so we need to have basic rules that we can fall back on to ensure who has the right access. But also functionalities. If you want to delete information, which is part of archiving, it would be very nice that you have a functionality within your system that actually allows you to delete information and not have it resurface somewhere else in a different folder or file, so to speak. Well, this is all very good, but what we notice in reality is actually that when they adhere to all their internal rules and the time comes for them to transfer the archive, I come around and say, okay, it's very good, you have metadata to your information, but which standard did you use? Is it GDPR approved? Well, no. Okay, well then we'll have to do rework. And basically, in every situation, you get government employees looking like this. It's work that they do not want to do not have time to do, and absolutely have no idea how to do. So this is a very depressing message to give to these people. So what we actually try to do via archiving by design is look at what is it that I as an archival institution have as requirements for actually loading all their information into my system, and how can I ensure that all this is happening here. It's actually proven to be very beneficial. This is a system, a very schematic sketch, but you can see the types of subjects that you would have to touch upon. It's not only about metadata, it is about your conversion policy. How many of you have maybe had the instance in which you tried to open a Word document from, let's say, 10 years ago? Probably you got a pop-up from Windows that said, I'm sorry, this document is no longer being supported. You had to do a conversion. Happens a lot within the systems of the municipality. So how can we actually ensure that file formats are used that are sustainable for a longer period than 8 years, hopefully for 50 years or 100 years. Same goes with the information quality. You will not imagine how many times before I have to transfer or do the migration process with the municipality, I come across files, records, documents that are incomplete. Either information is missing, information was never entered, there is no audit trail. If I am the gatekeeper or the insurer of reliable, complete information, I cannot deal with records that are incomplete. I mean, we're talking about good information here. This is not an example of good information. So you see that there is a plethora of subjects that I can actually address to ensure that that archiving is done in a very correct manner. Any questions so far, or things that you would like to go a little bit deeper into before I continue? No? Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with your policy. But if you don't have the right policy, if you don't have the right work plan, then you're going to have these problems.
Yes, that's indeed a very big part of it. On more the strategic level, there should be an idea of the policy that you want to ensure indeed. But what you see happening a lot, that people don't really pay that much attention on a strategic level to archiving. And that's when you get these problems, indeed. Yeah. Anything else? No? Then I'll continue. So basically, if you see archiving by design, yeah, it's a bit noisy. If you see archiving by design applied, I think you can maybe look at it in this picture. What might be a little bit misleading in the name archiving by design is that it is about archiving. It can be, but it is not per se. Basically, the approach is we want to do things by design. So we want to think about measurements that have to be taken into account beforehand, but we do it through the lens of archiving. But that by no means actually means that we cannot take other approaches into account. So for example, I've been working in the Netherlands on a functionality that allows government officials to do deletion within their systems. For that, you need a good functionality. When thinking about the requirements that would be necessary to make such a functionality, we did not only look at what does our archival practice say. No, we also looked at what does the GDPR say. What information can and can't we delete according to the GDPR? We also looked at data protection. So the more information protection side of it. What are the standards actually saying that we have to adhere to when it comes to deleting information? I mean, if you look at what deletion in itself means from the perspective of data protection, I mean, there are so many more things that you have to take into account. So very important to also take those viewpoints by design into your consideration of how are you going to archive. Same goes for data storage and data management. Well, there's a lot that I have said. Luckily, there is a guideline. You can actually visit it, look at it on the website of the National Archive of the Netherlands, which actually helps you in a very down-to-earth way to make a sense of what archiving by design is and how you can apply it within your own organization. There are a lot of examples that are being given, so I would highly recommend you to visit that website. Then, the final point, actually, or the final portion of my presentation, I mentioned the baseline measurement that came to the front as a need, basically. So the idea behind it was, okay, so how can we as professionals get a sense of the state of affairs of our records management? So this is a tool that you can use for it. It is a tool that is based on a quality management system that is being broadly used in the Netherlands. It is called GO. And basically what we did is took that model because it's proven its usefulness and it's a very robust tool to use. We have basically tried to adjust it to the Caribbean situation. So basically it means that we have skipped a few questions that we know for sure that have no ground in the region whatsoever. So it makes no sense to have it in the questionnaire. So it is a simple Excel document in which you go through questions. And what you do, what you mentioned just a second ago, is that we look at different levels of records management. So we have the strategic level, in which we focus on policy. What is it around policy that you actually would ideally like to have in place so that you can make a further concretization of what it is that you actually have to do in order to ensure that you, for example, adhere to laws and regulations. So strategy, so the strategic level, highly focused on policy. The second level is the tactical level, and basically the tactical level makes a further concretization of the strategic level. So for example, if you say that you want to do deletion within your company, it is then important to say, okay, so do we have personnel working who have sufficient knowledge level to actually be able to execute the policy? So you're going to look at education, you're going to look at which people should be allocated to which tasks to be executed. So that's the tactical level. Then we have the operational level, and that is what the word entails. You are going to look at its most concrete form, how you can make the policies that you have mentioned on your strategic level, how can you put them into practice? So this is basically the way that this baseline measurement instrument works. I have a few questions that I would like to answer with you, and I'm just curious to get a sense of, is this something that you have policy for within your respective organizations or not? So it's a very open conversation that I would like to start with you. And I have 3 questions. And each of the questions has to do with one specific level, so strategic, tactical, or operational. So this question, on the strategic level, So what we want to know is to what extent has it been established which organization or organizations is or are responsible for the care and supervision of information objects that have not yet been transferred to the archival institution. So this is what we call the dynamische fase, basically. Just by some answers, in your organization, is it clear who is responsible for that? Or is it not? Maybe I would just like to know. I see a nodding of a head there. Maybe you would like to elaborate?
Yes.
For you, it's yes. Okay, so you have a clear appointee for this. Yeah. And might I ask, do you work at an archival institution, department, or?
Into the government.
In the government you work. Okay, you have policies that actually say who is responsible for it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. You have this as well. Okay, interesting. So on the strategic level, you have some policy actually stating who is responsible. Is there anyone for whom this is not a reality? No one? So on all levels, you would say that this is at least something that you have. Yeah. Okay, interesting. So then the next question, because then we have to concretize it a little bit more, and that's when it sometimes gets difficult. But this question has a lot to do with to what extent is it clear whether your employees or your colleagues have the right level of knowledge to carry out their records management activities? Anyone who would like to elaborate? So do you and your colleagues have the right level of knowledge to do what it is that you are supposed to do? And how does your organization measure that, or how do they assess whether that is the case? You have, for example, periodic reviews done by your manager or something like that.
We had inspection reports before the level of qualification. Problem is that there is no institution anymore for
Okay, so basically you're saying you have an instrument to measure the level of knowledge of your managers, but if there's something lacking, you don't have an institution to which you can send them to actually brush up on their knowledge. Okay, so that's very interesting. So you have a measurement instrument, you can make it insightful, but what then?
So we have norms. So the norms is the law. Stipulates how which kind of training you must have to manage your record. But there's no institution.
Yeah.
So what we did is create our own education program.
Okay, and is this something that you just created internally within the archival institution, or?
No, within the government. But it's a one-time project, so there's no follow-up.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so but this was funded by the government then, yeah. So I'm curious to know, because there is no formal institution, but how did the government go about being persuaded to actually have at least some sort of a training program for the managers? The chip, yeah. Yeah, that would be a very good.
The business case was the backup. You know, if you store a lot of this structural archives, you lose about more than 1 million, which you can better appraisal, and then you will economize your storage.
Yeah. Okay, this is very interesting because you pressed on a sore that the government had, because it's a financial disaster if you would continue like that. Yeah, very, very interesting approach. You see this a lot also happening in the Netherlands. They just make a business case and say, okay, so how much is it going to cost us? And usually the conclusion is, okay, we cannot circumvent this any longer. We have to invest. But then you hope that you are not too late. Okay, thank you, Max, for that contribution. Anybody else, some experience from your own background you would like to share? Well, I can say from my experience that we struggle with this a bit in the Netherlands, because when it comes to managers, usually you have some form of certification, that is true. But when it comes to people doing more operational work, what you notice is that they actually need to make the transition to fully grasping what working in a digital environment is about. And you have courses, for example, the ones that are being provided by GO School of Information. But it's very difficult to measure what is actually that level of knowledge that we're looking for. So what you see happening in the Netherlands a lot is that we try to put our desire in a little bit more broader terms, what we call skills and competencies. So we're looking for people who can implement archiving by design, for example, but there is no clear structure of what does that then entail. We have a definition and we have examples of how you can implement it, but you cannot say, okay, you did an implementation of archiving by design, this is the grade that you get. So it's sometimes a little bit difficult to get a sense of what is then that level of knowledge that we're dealing with. And then the follow-up question, if you want to improve, how can we then do that? The final question has to do with the operational level. So to what extent does the organization have an overview of file formats that have been assessed as suitable for the long-term recording of information? So are there file formats of which within your organization, you know, if we use this, then we will be able to open these documents in at least 20 years. I cannot say anything for 100 years because that's so far into the future, that's a little bit difficult. But I'm curious, do you work with such overviews of file formats? If I say something like PDF-A, does that ring a bell? Do I see some nodding head? Do you have any other examples other than PDF-A for instance? Raw? Yeah. TIFF? Yes. So there is a little bit of an insight in what is needed. Well, these are things that they are very concrete. Yeah. Oh.
Maybe there's one
Yeah, that is the follow-up point indeed, because we can say from the Dutch experience, we do have an overview of which file formats are suitable for the long-term record keeping, but we find it also very difficult to get an overview of, okay, so how is it being used within the company? Yeah, well, normally we can get a little bit of a sense of that, but how is it used consequently? So every time, that is very difficult. And what we are also dealing with currently is actually that we get requests from the municipalities that say, okay, it's very great that you want me to use PDF-A, but we are so used to working in a Word format, so the Microsoft viewer, why not put that as a preferable format to use? So that is when you can also see that, okay, you see the leniency that we have as an archival institution. You see that shifting a little bit as well. For example, Stadsarchief Amsterdam has said, okay, well, Word is used so widely by a lot of our civil servants. We're going to allow that as a format to use within our Edipo. Yeah. So this was my story. I don't know if you have any questions left or things that you would like to ask or get a better understanding of. If not, then yeah. Oh, yeah. So your question was, what is a realistic time horizon to use when you talk about preserving information? Because 100 years can feel a little bit overwhelming. That is absolutely true. And I have to say, I don't have a clear answer for that, because we do operate based on the idea that we would like to have that information accessible for over 100 years. But what we do have in the Netherlands is this concept of active and passive preservation. So basically what you try to make a distinction between is the preservation acts that really are geared towards keeping the zeros and ones, so the bits and bytes of an information system, to keep them working. This is something that is very technical, and usually it's not something that we necessarily have to concern ourselves with. But what is interesting is the type of preservation that has to do with conversion. So when I know that I use a certain format, so for example, PDF-A, and I see in the field that there is a shift going on. So when I say the field, I mean the preservation field, that says, oh, wait a minute, we have seen that the PDF-A format is no longer a useful format for the way that we search or want to preserve information. Then we start to go to a new format. So in that case, you do not really have to concern yourself with a certain timeline. You look at the developments within the field. So that is a little bit of an answer that I could give to your question, because it's very difficult to say, okay, we focus on 50 years or on 20 years, because we don't know what the development in the fields are going to be like. So that, I hope it's a little bit an answer to your question, but that is what we do in the Netherlands. And I think, oh, I have to recall this now, but you have the pronoun check. I think it's done by the library. Oh, I'm blanking on the name right now, but what they basically do is bring out a list of formats that are usable for the foreseeable future. And what that foreseeable future is, we cannot put a timestamp on that, but it does help us to know, okay, so what are the changes that are going on in the field. I will look it up for you and then send you the information. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it right now, but yeah, thank you for the question. Any other question? Maybe from the online viewers, I haven't actually checked if there were any questions. I'm sorry, but you have the opportunity to ask some questions now if you have any. And if not, then I'm thanking you for listening, and then I'll give the floor to Rita.
Thank you very much. Interesting on archiving by design. Buzzword sometimes, but I think it's a lot of value in it as well. For the last half an hour or so, I'm going to talk to you about the added value of records management. And for the ones who did a workshop with me earlier or before, I'm going to use Mentimeter again, my favorite tool for presentations. I hope this is still your favorite tool as well. So if you have a phone or a device, please go to menti.com and use the code 27882435. And of course, also the people at home, please join in and give your answers. We'll see how far we get in making clear what the added value of records management should be and how you communicate that to your stakeholders, client users, to make them understand what you're doing. The code will be on the screen all the time, so if you get lost connection or get kicked out of the application, not to worry. There. Yeah, for convenience, because there's a lot of terms now in our field. But now it's archiving is the same as record management, the same as document management, it's the same as information management, it's the same as this for the Dutch speaking people. I know there are all the kind of differences, of course, but just for this workshop, it's easier to use record management. And then I'm talking to the professionals who conduct, design, implement, and administer information services to support efficient access, movement, updating, storage, retention, and disposal of organizational information. Quite a mouthful, but I think you all do a lot. And I think a lot of time, some people don't really maybe see it, but you all do. So that's why I want to talk about it today. I hope it works again. Yeah. I'm going to start with a little movie. This is the former director of the Dutch National Archives. And I'm also a member of the board of the KNVR, the Dutch Royal Association of Information Professionals, the Dutch Acuril. Basically, and we made 3 documentaries by now. This is from the second one called Toegang or Access. And I think if we talk about the importance of archives, I think he stated it really well, so I want to share that with you.
Ik zeg vaak, als je wil weten of een land democratisch is, dan moet je gewoon kijken of je het archief binnenkomt. Toegang tot informatie is een soort van basisvoorwaarde voor een rechtvaardige samenleving. En daarom is openbare toegang tot archieven is een democratische grondrecht. En je kan het dus omdraaien. Op het moment dat je dat niet hebt, dan heb je geen flauw idee wat er over jou besloten wordt en wat je daaraan kunt doen. Ik heb net een heel mooi citaatje van Derrida opgezocht. Derrida is een filosoof die zich echt met archieven heeft beziggehouden. Hè? En die zegt, nul pouvoir... Ik zal het gewoon in het Nederlands zeggen, anders wordt het ingewikkeld. Er is geen macht zonder controle over het archief. En democratie wordt altijd afgemeten aan dit essentiële criterium. De participatie en de toegang tot archief. En daarmee de toegang tot interpretatie. Nou, kijk, als Derrida dat al heeft gezegd, wat moet ik daar nog aan toevoegen? Je ziet op allerlei terreinen dat zodra je als burger een andere opvatting hebt over wat rechtvaardig is, bijvoorbeeld, of wat een goed besluit is geweest, dat je informatie nodig hebt om daarmee je recht te halen. Dat is op macroniveau, politiek niveau, maar op microniveau geldt het net zo goed. Als jij het gevoel hebt dat jouw rechten worden getreden door je buurman, omdat hij een schuurtje bouwt in jouw stukje achtertuin, dan moet jij kunnen bewijzen dat dat jouw stukje achtertuin is. Dus toegang tot informatie is een soort van basisvoorwaarde voor een rechtvaardige samenleving.
So according to Maris Engelhardt, it's a little bit more than bringing structure and information and making sure all the files are nicely stored in the basement of the archive. You are more like protecting democracy, giving the civilians what they need. And I agree. I think sometimes we underestimate what the real value of record management actually is. During COVID, those kind of cartoons came by a lot in the Netherlands. For the non-Dutch speakers, I will translate it on the left bottom. Next agenda topic, presentation, digitization of the archive. Before we start, Josh, would you like to mute yourself? And then Josh says, but I'm the one giving the presentation. And then the boss says, yeah, that's exactly why you should mute yourself. You know, sometimes that is the way people and management looks at archives. You know, it's a burden. And it shouldn't be, of course. And I think that's why we need to talk more with our colleagues or management stakeholders about the added value and importance of archive and record management. In the event, you have 3 statements for you, and I wonder if you totally disagree or strongly disagree or strongly agree with these statements. First, the management of my organization doesn't really see the importance of record management. The second one, my colleagues don't really understand how my work as record manager benefits them. And the third one, lack of funding is the reason for a very slow process of digitization of information of our organization. The 3 statements, share with us if you strongly agree or strongly disagree. Of course, also for the people online, but the more, the better, of course, they have a good overview of what you think about this. That's of course another organization you work, like for example, you say you work for Archive. I hope the management understands that it is more or less important.
I'm actually at the level of nationwide.
Nationwide, yeah.
They can hold the bar as my.
So what is interesting for me is the second one, because I do work at an archival institution, and I just presume that my work can be categorized as records management. But sometimes I feel that my direct colleagues are asking, okay, so what is it that you actually do? And maybe it has to do with the project management aspect or the advising aspect. It's always difficult when you have functions like that in your job title to say what is your added value, because they usually think that it's kind of like an empty job. So I do recognize that problem.
Someone else wants to comment on the statements as well, why you feel maybe strongly disagree or agree? It's not too bad actually, this score. Normally in the Netherlands I see a little bit more at the first one, a lot like the management doesn't have a clue what the people in the basement are doing. The base is not really true anymore, but when I started in this field of work 20 years ago, and I visited organizations to talk about the new competencies and education programs they needed, I was like, Eric, welcome, come follow me downstairs into the basement, because the archive and the people working in the archive are always in the basement. And I think that's, okay, structure-wise, maybe it's the best place to put the archive in the basement because of the way. But as information is so important for companies nowadays, I think organizations nowadays, the team should be in the center of the building, the center. I think that's fine. Let me see, my colleague doesn't really understand how my work as a record manager benefits them. 2.5. So most of you, translated well, of course. A little bit in the middle as well. We and you score a little high on the lack of funding. Lack of funding also means probably that the management doesn't really understand what you could do if they give you funding. So there's a contradiction between the third and the fourth. What I'm trying to aim in this workshop today is that in the end we have some nice new insights on how to convince your management that the lack of funding cannot be an excuse to not start the transition from paper to digital. So why this session? I think, and I experienced that in my daily work, that there's a general assumption that with digital systems, digitization, and digital aids, record management functions are no longer needed because the systems will take over. Smart scanners, automatic metadata, intelligent search. So why do you need an information professional to make all the information of the documents accessible? And also, this should make it so easy that every civil servant or every colleague is able to be his own record manager. That was a general assumption for the Dutch government for years. So they didn't invest in the development of competencies, in getting new people in, etc., etc. And then finally, a few years ago, they find out, wow, it didn't work like that. The systems are not user friendly, and most people who are supposed to do their own record management, their record management just save us and on their own laptop, and there's the document, no one else can access it, and we don't know if it's like sustainable or accessible in the future. That's what we see a lot in the Netherlands. And that's also why the program I just mentioned, Open the Border, is there, because a lot of the governmental information is just not accessible for the whole government and everybody who needs it. This morning there was a meeting where it turned out after research by the Dutch Inspection of Heritage and Record Management, found out that hardly any ministry in the Netherlands uses standard metadata models. And that means that a lot of information is not being lost, but really hard to find. I found it really shocking, and they blamed it on, yeah, that's not a good standard. But yeah, it's not a good standard, doesn't mean you don't have to use any metadata. But it's daily practice.
I'm wondering, the decision is based on every information manager. I mean, at the time that the government decided it could have been a good policy.
Yes.
Now we're down.
Yeah, and this.
And you have to adjust.
Yeah, they still think that's the way forward. So I'm going to spend a lot of money to teach people how to be your own record manager.
Yeah.
And I think they made a mistake because we used a typekamer. I don't know if you know that concept as well. Then if you, as a civil servant, you need to send a letter. You wrote it in your own handwriting, go to a place where everybody was typing sheets. You got it back, put an envelope, and send it away. After the personal PC of the PC came, and everybody was taught how to word process, you could make your own letter on your computer, print, put an envelope, and send it away. So that the typekamer, the typing room, yeah, you think so? Yeah, maybe disappeared, and everybody was his own type himself. That works because I think it's a lot of advantages of doing it yourself. And nobody reads your concept letters. If you make a mistake, nobody sees it. It's safe. It is different with being your own record manager because it's much more complicated. It's a lot of work in people's mind if you have to put on paper metadata and file it the way it's meant to be. Especially because lots of the document management system and other information systems are totally useful. And that's because I'm the information manager, so ICT people. That's because ICT people make those systems and then I do my record. So that you end up with not people. Unfortunately, but that's why people think, well, I have to save this document. If I will save on my own laptop, at least it's there, it's easy, push on the button and it's there, and I won't lose it. But we don't think about it. That we access to that document as well. So I think a few of those. Well, another thing is I think we as a profession are not really good in expressing ourselves and the added value we. I think from history we are maybe a little bit introvert and doing our work as we're supposed to do. But sometimes we forget to tell other people what we're doing, why we're doing, what the added value is, and why it's so important. And also, again, I don't want to talk too bad about ICT people. They are really different. They use difficult words, make it really complicated. People like, oh, that's really important. Let's listen to them. And we as a group are a little more quiet. And that's probably my management thought. Okay, we can do without the digital era, or we need so many records. So what happened in the Netherlands, because also a very high age, a lot of people in pension, and also because there's not decent education. We use that like on university level and university applied science level, if you information services management course for education, and it's all gone. So it's really hard to get new people. But still, I think it's really important. But there's a few challenges, and it's not just telling other people that support is not enough. Because I think people have a lot that has to help with more. I think you, before you start expressing yourself, telling other people how important your work is and what it can give people and what the added value is, you also have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. Because coming into a new era, digital era, you need maybe different skills. Also in the program I'm doing now for the federal government, we did a whole publication on the new competences of the modern 21st century record management. And according to the research, You need 54 competencies to be a record manager. That's quite a bit. Ranging from IT, knowledge, data management knowledge, to communication, to be brave, be assertive, etc., etc. But nobody has those 54 competencies. So you have to look at your team, see if all those competencies are there. And if you are together, what we say in the Netherlands, schaam with 5 poten, sheep with 5 legs, because that's what everybody wants. But they don't exist. But you also should know what your services are. Most of us probably know, yeah, what we do is like the registration, files, etc. But also a little bit further, what is the value of what you're doing? That's why you're not doing it for you want to serve civilians, you want to make your organization better, etc., etc. But you also have to know what your customers want. You see a lot when people in the Netherlands live in one municipality which has good digital information services. If you live next door, you think, oh, that's what we want as well, but my municipality is still paper oriented. So the pressure from outside can be there as well. Like, why can I roll out a list, then put this down the road, fill in a web form, and why do I have to go to the end person to build in the mind? So knowing what your customer wishes for and his needs is really important. You have to talk to them to know what they also the way they search the information, the way they want to store the information, etc. If you know this, you can also make a clear message for your audience and how you can communicate why. But our few challenges still ahead. Sometimes maybe it feels like it's a wall heavy load of the hill. That's not going on. The world is getting more digital and more digital and more digital every year, and COVID even accelerated that. And this is from a survey a few months in COVID times, and people are planning to do much more online than they already did. And that means that the information services have to be more digital as well, because people just want it. And also because a lot of organizations shut down, supposed to work from home or not allowed to go to the office, but you still needed the information. For a lot of organizations, there was a good trigger to step up in the transformation to digital information services. But as an organization couldn't do it, it came to a standstill. I don't think the next, the involvement in the next COVID wave coming is accepted anymore, that people don't have access to 24 hours. We also have 5 generations of customers we're working with. Here is the a little bit older, 52 plus generation here. This is the younger generation. They all have different wishes and needs. It comes with dealing with information and to communicate as well. It's important to realize what those needs are. If you're big part of your customers or your colleagues to handle your information are on the older to the left-hand side of this graph. Maybe putting everything in an app is not the best way. If you are younger, over with voice instead of writing. See not in Netherlands, people don't type anymore. Worried that people don't read anymore. I think we should be worried that people can't write anymore in a few years' time, because if you are in a Dutch train in the morning traffic and you rush hour and you look at people's shoulder what they're doing, they're just sending voicemails to WhatsApp. They don't type anymore, they just speak, send, listen. Yeah, I think in 10 years' time we don't know how to write. Easy sentence. But maybe you should think about in this new generation you work for, that they want to talk to their computer, say, I want to file 22 June the Acuril documents, and then it pops up on your screen. That's actually my dream. If you talk about backup management, those kind of things, just talk to my screen and there's the file. And the only file, the one I'm looking for, not 10,000 files. That's my dream. But important to realize, who are you working for, where you but I think that's what Migiza made clear as well. Archiving algorithms is difficult, more difficult. Yeah, different. You say difficult. It's a little more difficult than just archiving the document. It's getting more and more complex. One of the challenges I have. And I think soft skills are getting more important. You have to tell your story, you have to be creative, you have to do some problem solving, to be analytic, be able to adapt to new developments. Work together really important, like I said, you cannot only work on competencies in one person, so you have to work together with other people. Sometimes I think this is even more important than your archive skills, but at the same time, I think the basic level of technical skills. It is getting more and more important. And then, because I think information center are every organization able to know their processes, management, quality management, business case management. Also, maybe new use for archive. But the documents in the store, this whole part of I think. And you have expectation versus reality. People want to Google. Because why can't I Google at work? Why do I have to fill in, if you work with digital systems, fill in like 6 metadata fields before I get my search result? Why can't I just Google like I do at home? We know that, okay, Google's nice, we get 50 million hits in 0.23 seconds. And you're not sure if the right piece of information there, but at home, the non-recommended should take right. So why can't you do it at work? And then maybe sometimes it's problem. A lot of people archive is still old fashioned, it doesn't business anymore. Maybe, I don't know if it was, but a lot of people see, and also librarians and ICT as well, see archivists, yeah, it's really like so. And I think we should tell them this not at all, because information is the motor where every organization evolves around, but they're going to have to be doing it. But still, you have to. This one I skip time-wise. I think we need to make sure that it's a marketing term, brand awareness. I think all your colleagues know that you exist. There you go. You have people working on the archive, record managers, you have people who document management. Do they also exactly know what you're doing? And I will question that. I think a lot of people think, the archive make sure that all the documents are there. That's okay. But brand awareness means that they really understand what you're doing, how you can help them, what you have to tell you. So I think we have to work on that. The soft skills, for example, the communication skills. So that's why we need to talk about it. And this is, I think, this is for the most important part of my presentation, but it should be okay. And I would like you to motivate that if you walk out the door, you keep on thinking, what's my added value? Every service you have, every product you keep on thinking, what's the added value? And not for yourself, but for your users, your colleagues, your stakeholders. So added value can be different for different persons. The first one you can forget, that's like the official definition of added value, not really interesting, but this is important. Added value is the answer on the question, what's in it for me? But not from your own perspective, it's from the user, stakeholder, management, civilians perspective. Just every service you have, every product you have, just try to ask yourself, what's in it for me? What does it give someone? Does it help it? Solve a problem? And you need the value loop. And you have to communicate it, because sometimes you know, but you can't tell them. And then to find out yourself, and it doesn't work. So added value is not really the description of your daily activities. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to type in Mentimeter what you think your added value is. And I don't want to read things you do. So if you say, I structure the archive or structure the documents, that's not added value, that's your daily activity. Also important, but not something you can convince your management to invest more in your department. So think about that. What's in it for me? Customer, stakeholders, management, perspective. Can also be a problem you solve. People are really happy if you can solve a problem for them. So if you can find something, solve, tell them, for example, I can't find anything in the system, the document management system, help them, you have to call it. Those things will work, getting more value in your organization. So when you're going to describe your answer, you must for me. Then problem you solve. Don't use jargon, this language that only other record management understand. Try to keep it simple. So everybody will understand what you say, short and clear. Don't elaborate really long time because people lose their interest. Keep your audience in mind, again, try to think from their perspective, not your own perspective. And not an perspective. For an example, for let's say the added value of a library, I find this a really nice one. If you want books, computers, everything you travel to time and space, it's a library card. That's really added value for a little boy there. And you see, thinking what's in it really from the little kid's perspective, that helps. So, now it's your turn. I gave you 5 minutes to come up with added value of your team for the organization. More than you know, before having your good one. I know a few people online already did this question in our workshops or something. See you. At the moment, I'm going to pick out one. I don't know if it's someone in here, feel like running up someone at home. If it's someone at home, just unmute yourself and start talking. And I'm going to see one of the answers to see if we can get to the deeper meaning, the real added value of the answer. I'll pick this one. It's randomly, but make info easily available. Someone in here? Or someone online? If it's someone online, please make yourself known by unmuting yourself. Otherwise, you have to go to find someone. Some of you. If you think I don't want to be questioned by Eric, I understand, and then you can just be quiet. Picking up. There's a disadvantage of doing with people at home and online, of course, providing information. Maybe I can just ask. Who wants to share what you filled in? Okay, yeah.
Actually, the first one was pretty much.
Oh, okay, yeah, it was the.
It was not there.
Yeah, pretty much the same, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was,
It was making our diverse connection.
Yeah.
Postcards, programs, dance. So, the added value of our team is to make it.
Is to make the diverse collection visible and accessible. Those are the keywords for us.
what does it give that to me? That your collection is accessible? What's the added value for me?
The added value for you is that you're able to access information which was formerly not known, not accessible, and it's not even if you're out of yourself, it would be then accessible to do research or for your own personal knowledge.
Imagine I'm a researcher, so it's accessible online. That means, can I translate it as, okay, because you have an accessible and good collection and trustworthy information within the right information, I can do better research, and maybe I'm a master's student. The chances of me getting my degree are bigger. That's your added value. I don't care about access to stuff. You know what I mean? With your collection, the real added value is that you help people getting their PhD, for example. Yeah, that's real added value. That's real added value. And make it accessible is what you do. And if you have a conversation, you can always explain later, okay, this is what I do, but the real added value is, no way, I help people getting further in a professional life, for example. Another one. Let me see. Who had something in the line of providing information as well? Both the archive, like record management perspective. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's more like a democratic right to information. So, and if I translate it a bit further, like the Marcus Engelhardt said as well, the right to information, access to information, says something about the democratic values of your country. And I make it one step further, maybe it can even make your country a better place. And I think people working in archives, like I mentioned, are helping make the country a better place. Sounds a bit far away, maybe, but I'm convinced that that's where you work. Time-wise, I go on to the next, the last. I say the few added values, but I think are for us. I think the few of the most important added value you can give to your colleagues, stakeholders, clients, civilians, and your country. But what you do with getting making information accessible, and it's easy to find and search, your colleagues from the ministry department can do their work quicker, because they don't have to search for information like how many hours a day, and because you provide the right information, you can do work better. So next time you see a colleague somewhere working, say, no, I don't need the archive, I don't know what you do, or recommend it. You're the one who makes his life easier, more efficient, and even better, because you make sure it's the right, trustworthy, authentic information. It's not really about storing information in systems or in the server, maybe. No, it's making about life easier for your colleagues. Be efficient, more efficient and effective in your work. Saves time and money. Money is always a good reason for management to listen to you. Every year, Gartner, one of the big consulting companies in the United States, comes out with a report. Every year it says People in administrative organizations spend 30% of their time on searching for information. The report never says that after 30% of the time they find the information you're looking for, probably not. But if you work with 100 people, that means that 30 of those 100 people are searching, not doing anything, look for them, they're not searching for information. That means if you have your record management right, you can probably reduce that percentage low and you save a lot of money. Interesting way to have your next discussion when it comes to budget. Just tell the management that you are there to save the money. Safeguarding democracy, compliance, the laws, sometimes government has to work according to the law. If your information is not right, it's really hard for governments to fulfill that number one task. Like I said, that's what we have in the Netherlands now. I don't think that this federal government can do that lawful task at the moment because the information management is just not right. Luckily, they said it themselves. It's not something secret that they say. The real report states exactly what I told you today as well. At the moment, the Dutch government is not able to function as they should. They have to I think the added value also that you do better services for customers, clients, companies, etc., by giving them the information smoothly with the right information online, preferably, and 24 hours a day. And I think as well, in the end, everybody working with archiving and record management is working on a better country. It's the same kind of office to make life easier for other people, and I think that's worth a lot. So you're not only structuring information, putting documents in the right boxes, label them, metadata, etc., etc. I think you're working on those kind of things. I hope you think about it a little bit later today, tomorrow, and I hope that you believe in it as well. There's a little lot, of course, all the challenges I stated as well. You have to work on those numbers. Although you can say I make sure our company is effective, cost efficient, etc., etc. But then, you know, it should be somewhere the expectations and reality should match. I always end with this one. Go out there, act as an information hero. Make sure that people know what your added value is. Convince them that you are there to make this world a better place. Nice ending of the session. So that's my last. That's it. Thank you very much for your attendance today. I hope to see you soon about the next webinar. And for people who stay the whole evening, of course, a nice cultural outing. Somewhere. Bloemel. Yeah. Okay. There's something to do. Sorry, I'm too quick for those. I'm going to give you the microphone again.
You know, I have to cut you because I don't want you to run out the door. Thank you so much. I don't think I need a mic, but
that's what people are going.
Thank you very much to Eric and our presenter, Ms. Yes, and our panelists. It was so nice having you. There was so much that we learned. And if you forget anything, or if you need more information, or if you have to let your staff, advance themselves, just go to Go information. Yes. So I want to thank everybody, and I have goodies for our presenters. We cannot let them go away empty-handed. So we shall call Migiza. I want to write Migiza. Do not look at the size of the video, but the sentiment behind it. Thank you so much. You already remember the section.
Yeah. And the section right accuses.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Okay. Then we shall call on Raymond. I don't like Raymond. for good name. Thank you. Yes. And then that. Multicolor. Thank you, ma'am. And happy birthday to you, Mary. Older, wiser. And thank you, everybody. You had a good day. Okay. Stand up, stand up. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Mary. Yes, Mary. Thank you so much.